Across 112 years of history, the Indianapolis 500 has proven itself as a great spectacle in racing. Many amazing battles, great finishes, and interesting stories have been remembered as bookmarks in Indy history by fans, journalists, and historians alike. But the other stories to find their mark in the Indy history books can have a much more grim legacy. Regarded by many as the worst year in the history of both the Indy 500 and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the 1933 running of the Indy 500 is a sad reflection on the fundamental dangers of auto racing. Unlike the 1919 Indy 500, the subject of a previous video on this channel, the lead up to the 1933 running wasn't a story of a race returning after a multiple-year break. As such, the 33 race would feature a robust entry of 65 cars. Among these were 20 rookies, many of which were ultimately forgone by fans. However, there were some rookies of note in the entry list. The most successful of these would be future three-time Indy 500 winner Maury Rose, who would serve as a replacement driver. The driver he replaced was Hattie Wilcox II, who bears no relation to the 1919 winner Hattie Wilcox. He was originally on the entry list, however he would be disqualified before the race even started after race officials learned of medical issues pertaining to Wilcox. Originally thought to be epileptic, it was later revealed that he had type 1 diabetes. He would later sue the Speedway for slander and never compete in the Indy 500 again. Unfortunately, unlike the previous Hattie Wilcox, who'd be killed in a crash at the Altoona Speedway in Pennsylvania, Hattie Wilcox II would meet an equally tragic end. Serving as a flagman at the end of a race in Converse, Indiana on November 13, 1946, Wilcox would jump onto track to wave the checkered flag to winner Jimmy Wilburn. Kenneth Wines was unsighted behind Wilburn and would pull out for a last-ditch attempt at pass. In doing so, he would strike Wilcox, who died at the scene age 41. One driver that has always been labeled as a rookie is Bill Denver. This is incorrect. Information about his life and career is both inconsistent and scarce, so this is the best biography I could put together. He was born on June 12, 1901, named Uriah Denver Orem in Ravenswood, West Virginia. Him and his family soon moved to Akron, Ohio, where he'd grow up before moving to Audubon, Pennsylvania. He worked a night shift as a factory supervisor, but spent his weekends racing at dirt tracks across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and New Jersey. In 1930, Bill would attempt the Indy 500 for the first time. He was successful in this attempt, qualifying for the race in 35th. However, he would only make it to lap 41 before engine issues left him out of the race in 25th. He would try and fail to make the race in 1931. However, he would relieve Al Aspin for roughly 50 laps in the race itself. He'd skip out on 1932 before returning in 1933. His riding mechanic in the 1933 race would be Bob Hurst. Hurst was an Indiana native and had a rather interesting life to this point. At the age of 14, he dropped out of school to serve in the Marines during World War I, where he was commended for his bravery. He then dipped his toes into racing, before being selected by Denver to be his riding mechanic. The car they're driving is a Studebaker entered by Ray T. Brady. We jump ahead to May 28, 1933, and it's the final day of time trials in Indianapolis. Unfortunately, it would be this setting where tragedy would strike. During their qualifying attempt, the duo would crash in turn 3 at over 105 miles an hour. Both Denver and Hurst were thrown from the car, which soon burst into flames. Both were then taken to hospital, where Bill Denver would succumb to his injuries en route, with his riding mechanic Hurst passing away shortly after arrival. Bill Denver was 32, Bob Hurst was 31, and both were survived by their wives. With a dark cloud above it, qualifying would be completed later that afternoon. In total, 42 cars would make the field, the largest starting grid in the history of the Indy 500. Although many prayed for a safe race on May 30th, 1933, those prayers would unfortunately fall on deaf ears. The next driver to become a victim of the Speedway's wrath would be Mark Billman. Born March 10, 1906, he worked as a mechanic for Ford before beginning his own racing career at 19. Mark was no stranger to bad accidents, being the victim of one in 1929, where he'd injure one of his legs so bad it would become shorter than the other, giving him a pronounced limp for the rest of his life. As a rookie in the 1933 Indy 500, he'd qualify for the race in 22nd place. On lap 79, Billman, driving a Duesenberg, would hit the wall in turn 2, with the car eventually coming to a rest against the wall. Billman's riding mechanic, Elmer Lombard, would be thrown from the car and 150 feet outside the track. Although injured, Lombard would survive the accident. The same, however, couldn't be said about the driver. When rescue teams got to the car, it was as bad as they feared. Billman's left arm had been completely ripped off, both of his legs were broken, and he had suffered severe internal injuries. It took crews 20 minutes to get him out of the car, but at this point little could be done. Blood transfusions were tried but ultimately unsuccessful. Mark Billman would die an hour after his accident, aged 27. Unfortunately, there'd be more tragedy to come. The number 15 entry of driver Les Spangler and riding mechanic Glenn Jordan would be the next to fall victim to a crash. Les was a dirt tracker from Los Angeles, competing in his first Indy 500 as well. Glenn, on the other hand, had been a riding mechanic in 3 previous Indy 500s. He was the owner of a paint shop in Lafayette, Indiana, and served as a riding mechanic just because he wanted to be closer to the action. On lap 132, Malcolm Fox would lose a wheel in turn 1, spinning wildly out of control. In a vain attempt to avoid an accident, Les Spangler would go to the outside. Fox's car would touch Spangler's left rear, with the latter going well over 100 miles an hour at the time. The contact would send the Spangler-Jordan car into a series of rolls. They would both be crushed in the accident. Both were only 27. The night before the race, Spangler was looking at a mother rabbit and 6 bunnies when someone asked him if he was grooming them for their lucky hind feet. In response, he said, "I don't need any charms, I'm just naturally a lucky man." Just 24 hours later, he and his mechanic were dead. The 1933 Indy 500 was eventually won by Louis Meyer. In Victory Lane, Meyer, taking the advice of his mother to heart, would drink a glass of buttermilk in Victory Lane, a tradition integral to the history of Indy. But lost in the memory of the beginning of a still-standing tradition is a tragic month of May. 5 men were killed in the pursuit of racing immortality, marking the deadliest year in Indy 500 history. But we can all rest comfortably knowing that these men died doing what they loved, and thanks to safety innovations in the nearly 90 years since these tragedies, a terrible month of May like this will most likely never happen again.